Hello, welcome back to our latest We Are Sunderland briefing with myself, Dom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both from We Are Sunderland, in association, as ever, with the Fans Museum in Sunderland and Cost Specs Opticians. Thanks to those. It's been a nice, chilled international break from a Sunderland perspective, really, Scott. On the back of the dramatic 2-2 draw with Leeds, it kind of felt like that kept the momentum ticking over. And these next block of games can't really come soon enough now.
Yeah, it'll be good to get back into it, won't it? There's been bits and bobs happening from kind of news perspectives. There's been enough to write about and talk about. But you're right, in terms of kind of, the on-the-pitch stuff and who's around, who's not. It's always really hard to know on these international breaks. Obviously, some players are away, some are at home. Obviously, with Sunderland playing on Sunday, Regis Labris isn't doing his press conference till Friday. We're recording this on Thursday morning. So Friday, we'll get a bit better idea, won't we, of exactly who's around, who's fit, who's not, and we can start getting our teeth properly into the game at Hull on Sunday, which, to be fair, then starts a much busier spell of games. Although it's been a busy start to the season, the Championship always is, it doesn't feel like there's been that many midweek games so far. I guess that's in part a result of Sunderland going out of the League Cup so early. They've had a lot of free midweeks. That's not so much the case in the next block. So I think we can get our teeth into it properly in the next month or so.
Yeah, we touched on it last week. Those next 5 games: Hull, Luton, Oxford, QPR, and Preston. It's the away element of it, isn't it, that makes it testing, or certainly interesting from a Sunderland perspective. I guess there's two figures to talk about when we look back on the international break: Jordan Henderson and those links that have emerged, and Aaron Connolly, for 2 reasons, really. Firstly, because he's scoring goals. He's played 2 games for the under-21s. Well, not even 2 games, really. Played 45 minutes in the first game in the 6-0 win over Derby, and I think he played 70-odd minutes the other night at Huddersfield and has scored 3 goals. So we'll touch on that. But also because of that interview that he did at the back end of last week at the club, which I think immense praise, really, for him, obviously, for opening up, but to Sunderland as well for doing it so well with him.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to get your teeth into with that, really, isn't there? I mean, I think so. I think the first thing to kind of importantly make clear here is this, certainly from speaking to people in and around the club who've been involved with it and stuff like that. And I absolutely agree with you. I think, straight away, massive kudos to Aaron Connolly for being so open. And a real lot of praise for the way that Sunderland have handled it and done it and all of that. But I think it's important to say that this is very much Aaron Connolly's doing. Aaron Connolly wanted to do this. It wasn't a case of Sunderland saying, we want you to do this press interview, we need you to tell your story, blah, blah, blah. This was very much Aaron Connolly saying, I want to do this. I want to try and explain, why what's happened has happened. And if this helps anybody in football, out of football, whatever, then that's a massive thing. So, it's very rare to get someone being that open and that honest about what they've been through. I thought it was a fascinating listen. I think, a few elements to come out of it. I think, firstly, the way that it's been received is really interesting, because I do think that if this had happened 10, 15, 20 years ago, and I'm not just saying Sunderland fans here, I'm saying fans right across football, there would have been a certain element of, this is a guy on X amount of pounds a week. What on earth's he got to be feeling sorry for himself for? Get on with it. I think it's massively positive that football, society, everything has moved on past that. And there is an understanding now that, mental health issues can affect anyone. If anything, being in a high profile world such as football, especially like Aaron Connolly, when you were so young, when everything was thrown at you, it's almost, you're more vulnerable within that football setting than anywhere else in society. So I think there's an acceptance of that, which is a real positive. And then the last thing I think I would say on it is, and again, from speaking to people in and around the club, I think Aaron Connolly is more aware of this than anyone, that having come out and done this now, he's got to back it up. You know what I mean? He's been given a chance by Sunderland, and he's very eloquently explained why he feels he deserves that chance and why Sunderland have been willing to give him it. And I think there's, like I say, within the fan base, within football, I think there's real understanding of that. But I think there's also a sense of, well, okay, this is your chance. now go and take it. Because let's be brutally honest, if this Sunderland spell turns into another Middlesbrough or another Venezia, then it's very, very hard to see where Aaron Connolly goes next after that. So, I think there's a real understanding that he's been given a chance. Now he's got to take it. And as you started off by saying, the evidence so far in terms of his desire to play for the under-21s, his commitment when he was doing it, the form he showed, it's all really positive so far. So, I don't think we're very far away from Aaron Connolly being in the Sunderland first team. I'm not saying he'll start at Hull on Sunday, but I'd be surprised if he wasn't on the bench. I'd be surprised if he didn't come on at some point. So that'll be another massive step forward. And then it's, okay, what have you got? Let's see what you're capable of doing.
I'm not saying this is why he did it by any means. I can't imagine that this is anywhere near the top of his priorities. But when Connolly signed, we discussed him at length in these videos, and we kind of tiptoed around the idea of, is he going to be a problem in the dressing room?
Yeah.
Is his lack of professionalism going to be an issue for the young players? And I guess that's all because of perception, isn't it? And perception is so hard to shift in football. And I think by talking as he did, it helps you take a step back, doesn't it? And think, oh, well, actually, this isn't just a waster who's wasting his talent and isn't interested in getting the most out of his career and whose best years are behind him. He's someone who's gone through an incredibly difficult time and now wants to put those difficulties behind him and wants people to understand why things have worked out as they have.
Yeah, and you're right when you say perception, and that was the perception of him. And he was very open, as I think he was asked, wasn't he, by Oscar, who conducted the interview for the club. What do you think people think of you? And he was really honest and open about that. But I think he was also honest and open about the fact that it really wasn't just perception. To a large extent, that is how he was. He understands why he wasn't playing for Middlesbrough and why he wasn't getting a game at Venezia, and even at Hull last season, why things were up and down. Because he readily accepts that his life was spiraling out of control. Now, to have that level of awareness and to have actually actively done something about it has to be the biggest positive of all, doesn't it? Because if you don't get to that situation, then I would imagine you almost certainly can't help yourself. So, the fact that he's saying, yes, that was the perception of me, but actually, hand on heart, I kind of understand why it was, because really, I was feeling it myself. I wasn't happy with what I was doing. I wasn't happy with my drinking. I wasn't happy with the way I was carrying on my life. So, yes, there was a perception of him like that, but it was rooted in reality. And that's why those loans and those spells away from Brighton didn't work. And it's why ultimately Brighton made the decision to let him go. So, I think he understands that his career has gone a certain way because of mistakes that he's made. And clearly he wants to rectify that.
And those experiences and the fact that he's so openly talking about them can only benefit. I know we kind of said it at the time when he signed, but you're more like speculatively hoping that he might be able to help the young lads. But now we actually know what he has been through, or what he felt like he was going through. And after being thrust into the spotlight at Brighton and kind of ill-equipped really to deal with all that followed. Well, I'm not saying the likes of Chris Rigg and Tommy Watson and the other Harrison Jones and the rest of the young lads who are breaking through need any help. But hearing that experience can only benefit them, can't it?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And the fact that he's there and presumably very willing to talk openly to them about it will be a help. I also thought it was interesting. And listen, I'm sure Brighton will have their own side of this story. I'm sure there's two sides to the story, don't get me wrong. But taking what Connolly said on face value, I thought that Brighton didn't come out of it particularly well in terms of the way that they handled a young player who was away from home, who in a different country, had never been away from home before, didn't have a family support network, and all of a sudden went from being a complete unknown into the hottest property in the Premier League, literally in the space of 90 minutes. I think clubs do have to look at how they handle that and how they deal with that. Now, Sunderland have, not as quickly as it happened with Connolly, but they've got young players whose lives have changed dramatically, very quickly. Chris Rigg, clear example. But there's plenty of others. Hume came away from home more gradual introduction, not the explosive.
The team's littered with it, isn't it?
Exactly. So, everything I hear is that Sunderland are handling these young players incredibly well. But I wouldn't be surprised after listening to what Aaron Connolly was saying if there weren't internal discussions within Sunderland even saying, are we actually looking after these young kids all right? Are we doing everything that we can to support them? Might there be an Aaron Connolly in our dressing room that we're just not really, certain about or on top of yet? So I think hopefully that's a real positive as well, that, it will make clubs, and obviously specifically Sunderland, given that that's the club where this interview is taking place, to maybe just have a look at it and say, okay, is there anything that we could be doing better? Because, we're very blasé about the development course that someone like Chris Rigg is on, aren't they? Because he doesn't come across as a 17-year-old and didn't come across as a 16-year-old when he was. That doesn't mean that he's not still having these issues or these questions or whatever that Connolly was so open about. So I think that's interesting as well.
And the fact that he's had these troubles and he's had spells at Middlesbrough and Hull and Venezia that have all not gone to plan, and that a club like Sunderland, top of the Championship, is still willing to take a punt on him, shows the underlying talent there, doesn't it? And shows just what the potential is and what he could be capable of.
Yeah, and that's the other side to this, isn't it? Because like you say, ever since he signed, there's been a tiptoeing around, God, this could go wrong. This could go badly wrong. Well, it still could. But it could go very right. And, just looking back when I was writing the piece at that Tottenham game and those early days at Brighton and when he broke into the Ireland team, this is a player who it was felt at that time was destined for the absolute top. And I'm not just talking about necessarily high Premier League. I'm talking about one of the most exciting young forwards in Europe. Now, clearly the career's gone an awful long way south since then. There's an awful lot of water gone under the bridge. But if Aaron Connolly can get remotely near that, then Sunderland are signing a player that had this baggage not been there, they would not have been able to get anywhere near ordinarily. So, it always felt like a deal where there was the potential for it to go very wrong or the potential for it to go very right. I think this even just strengthens that even more. You know what I mean? And at the moment, everything that Connolly has done has ticked every box that someone would want ticking. What we need to see is what level he's actually playing at in a championship game. Now, let's not forget he scored goals for Hull City last season. It's not like he's never done it in the championship for years and years and years and years. He was scoring goals for Hull at the start of last season. And then obviously things dipped away a bit in the second half of the season, presumably due in large part to the issues that Connolly has openly described and was going through. So, there is the potential for this to be really good for Sunderland, I think. But at the minute, it's only the potential.
And Graham Murdy was full of praise for him when he was interviewed and asked by the club after the 3-2 win at Huddersfield this week. Connolly had scored 2 there. He scored 1 against Derby the week earlier. And he said he's a very, very good finisher. We've seen that. He's shown that on the training pitch and he's showing it now in games. But Murdy also talked about how good he's been around the younger lads in training and being around them in that environment. Telling them, obviously giving them tidbits and bits of advice, but also he said kind of not afraid to give them a bit of a kick up the backside if they need it. Labrise, before the international break, he was included in the squad against Leeds, but Labrise basically said, didn't he, that he was never going to play. He was just there to get a feel for it. We want him to play 45 minutes and then maybe 65 minutes in the international break for the 21s, which is exactly what he's done. Well, 5 minutes extra in the second game. It'd be a surprise if he started on Sunday, I think. But there's every chance we see him from the bench featuring for the first time, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that would be my reading of it. I don't see him going straight into the starting lineup because Wilson Isidore has done nothing wrong, and I think there's going to be every chance. Again, we'll find this out on Friday, but the suggestions pre-international break was that Mayenda should be there or thereabouts. So. I think it would be pretty harsh on both of them if Connolly was catapulted straight in. But I agree with you. I think he'll be on the bench at Hull. I think he'll almost certainly come off at some stage unless the game is either going incredibly well or incredibly badly. And then, like I say, you're into a run of Luton away on the Wednesday night, Oxford at home on the Saturday, QPR the following Saturday, Preston the following midweek. There's going to be a lot of games between this next international break. I think, all things being equal, Aaron Connolly will have started a game for Sunderland by the next international break. I'd be surprised if that hadn't happened.
And whereas the hope clearly then is that Connolly's best years are ahead of him, that's obviously not the case for Jordan Henderson. 34 now, since leaving Liverpool, it hasn't gone to plan. Reports a couple of weeks ago that he wants to return to the UK in January, Championship clubs, which prompted the inevitable Sunderland links. Where are we at with that then? Is it purely speculation? Could there be something there? Should there be something there? What's your reading of it?
Yeah, I think my understanding is that it's more than speculation, but only to the point of view that Sunderland have been having recruitment meetings right the way, since the start of the season, which you would fully expect. Clearly now we're a month and a half out, 2.5 months out from the reopening of the transfer window. So those discussions are going to start to become more detailed, more focused, etc. My understanding of it is that Sunderland are aware of the talk that Jordan Henderson wants to come back to England. They're aware of the fact that, the soundings are very much that Ajax probably won't stand in his way, that it would suit them as well, probably, if that happened. So he's a name that is being discussed or is in, on the table, if you like. But it hasn't progressed beyond that. We're certainly not in a position where Sunderland have made a decision on whether or not they're going to make a move for Jordan Henderson, what that move might look like, anything like that. I think there's a few reasons for that, but I think the principal one is, as I said, we're still 2.5 months away from the window, and priority, while you have long-term ambitions and long-term goals and long-term targets, quite often the January window in particular can turn into a window where actually it's about short-term fixes. And if Sunderland get 3 defenders between now and Christmas that get long-term injuries, they'll be looking to bring in a defender in loan in January, whereas as we sit here today, they wouldn't be interested in that at all. So I think that's a big thing. There's an acceptance that, that there might be short-term needs that override everything else come the end of December, and that's going to be the focus for January. That said, like I say, there is a degree of understanding that Henderson could be on the market, and a discussion will be had over that. Now, would it make sense? I think it's an interesting one. I did a piece on this earlier in the week where I kind of toyed with the twos and fros. I do think it's different to the Jermaine Defoe one. That's the obvious parallel, isn't it? Get a fan's favourite, someone who'd done really well with the club back towards the end of their career and hope they can have one last hurrah. Well, the Defoe one, Defoe had barely kicked a ball up at Rangers. He'd not played any kind of competitive football for the best part of a year. He'd had major injury issues. It felt like at that time that it was a leap of faith that Jermaine Defoe was going to come in and suddenly hit the ground running, even in League One. And obviously, we all know how it turned out. I think Henderson's different. Yes, he had the ill-fated spell in Saudi Arabia, but it was very brief. And prior to that, he'd still been playing for Liverpool and he's still been playing for England. He's been at Ajax. He did reasonably well in the second half of last season, played the vast majority of matches, has played a lot less so far this term, hence Ajax's willingness, I think, to let him go. Most of his games came in the early stages of the Europa League, but he's still playing in the Dutch top flight. He's still, training regularly, all of that. He's not had major injury issues. He's a player who has, by all accounts, has looked after himself incredibly well throughout his career. I mean, he's barely been injured, has he? You think of it all the time he played for Liverpool. So I think in terms of, could he come in and do a job in the Championship? I think the answer for me will be yes. Do Sunderland need a central midfielder? I think a lot of that depends on Samed, doesn't it? Who, let's be honest, we haven't seen yet. And at Labrissa's last press conference was suggesting it could be well into November, December before we do see him. So, at the moment with Rigg, Bellingham, Alan Brown, obviously, who can come in, and Dan Neil, if Samed's in that mix as well, then, maybe Sunderland don't need another central midfielder. But if Samed is not going to be up to speed and he's not going to be the player that Sunderland thought they were getting when he initially signed him, then I think there is a defensive midfield gap there, because for all that Dan Neil has done really well and continues to do well, and is looking more and more at home as the deepest liar of those three, he's not a natural defensive midfielder, is he? He's not a Henderson type. If Lebris decides for a specific game, he wants that type of player in there.
Oh.
Now, clearly, sorry, just one last thing. Clearly, the money is going to be a massive issue. Henderson is on way more at Ajax than Sunderland would ever be willing to pay. But he's also on way more at Ajax than any championship club would be willing to pay. So if Jordan Henderson is serious about wanting to come back to England and play out what is likely to be the last good days of his career, if you like, in the championship, then he is going to have to accept that either he's going to have to take a massive wage cut, or Ajax are going to have to agree to pay a massive part of his wages. And so, because I've seen fans saying, well, this is Cloud Cuckoo Land, the money won't work. And I agree, at the minute, it feels like that. But if Henderson is serious about wanting to come back to England, he's going to have to move on that, whether it's Sunderland or any club in the Championship.
And when you talk there about what he'll offer Sunderland on the pitch and whether it makes sense on the pitch, what about off the pitch? Let's pretend that the finances are doable. If we get to January and Sunderland are still kind of in and around the position they are now, right there in the promotion mix, what could he offer in the second half of the season? Those intangibles, I guess, he's been there and done it and won it all, really. How useful could that be in a promotion running? It is a very young squad. I know we talk about it all the time. It's still a young and inexperienced squad. A lot of these players haven't been in that position before. How useful could that be? And I guess the other thing is, if you go up, if Sunderland win promotion this season, well, having someone like Henderson, again, just to help the young lads acclimatise and adjust and get to grips with everything that surrounds Premier League football would be incredibly useful as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Because we talk about Sunderland having a young squad, and Lebris's answer to that, and it's got value, is yes, they might be young, but they're not inexperienced. And actually, you can have experience at 18 and be more mature and better grounded and in a better mental position than someone who's 30. And I fully agree with that. And Dan Neil, Joe Bellingham, someone like Tri Hume increasingly. Sirkin, they've played way more matches than players of their age might, normally have done. But what they haven't played is those massively pressurized matches, as you say, at the end of a season where everything's on the line, or at least very, very few of them have. A playoff semi-final, a playoff final, a last game of the season where going into the last 20 minutes, you need a result. Those kind of matches. And I think you're right. I think Henderson could be really, really useful in and around that, just as a leader, someone to pull them up, pull the squad together. And if you're going to play that role, I think the fact that he is the We Are Sider, the academy product, the player who the club means something to, would matter as well. We can get caught up too much on, well, he's played for Sunderland, wouldn't it be great to have him back? The romance of it. Yeah, I fully accept that sometimes that can be massively over-egged. But in the kind of leadership role that you're talking about there, I think the fact that it does matter to him, and everybody knows that, and it would be, it would make a lot of difference to Jordan Henderson as a person if he could help Sunderland get promoted in a way that it wouldn't to pretty much anyone else who you were bringing in with the same age and the same profile, etc., etc.
Hull then Sunday, first game back, first game in this next block of games before the international break that we touched on. What do we reckon? You're there Sunday. What are your thoughts going into it?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, to be honest. there's a few squad imponderables, isn't there? It's going to be interesting to see where certain players are. My ender obviously is an interesting one, because if he's fully fit, does he go straight back into the starting side, or has Wilson Isidore done enough in the games when my ender's absent for him actually now at the minute to be Sunderland's first choice? I think probably Isidore. What do you think if they're both fit and available?
Yeah, I think Isidore's. Considering the suggestions were that early in the season, if we don't sign a left winger, then Isidore will probably kind of jostle with Mundle for position on the left. Whereas I think if you look at it now, they're probably looking at it as Mundle and Watson as your left-sided players. Watson seems to have made inroads, doesn't he? He's come off the bench in the last 3 games, had a good international break, scored an impress for the 21s again. I think Watson is very much part of the first team picture now, and Isidore has probably been seen as another centre forward. That feels slightly harsh on my end, but I don't think it's bad for him. I don't think it'll be bad for my ender just to ease his way in. That should have been the plan this season for my ender, shouldn't it? Really, it was only because Sunderland found themselves in the position they were in at the start of the season that my ender was thrust into playing so much football so early. And although he did well, I think Isidore's done enough to keep his place. But it will be interesting in 3 or 4 games' time. Yeah. Who's going to be first choice then? Mayenda's fully up to speed. Connolly will have had game time under his belt. Isidore is only going to get better, you would think, with more games. And suddenly, the striker shambles that we spent all summer talking about, you're left here talking about the selection dilemma for Labrice. Sunderland making us look daft again, not for the first time in the last few weeks and months. I think it'll be Isidore Sunday.
Yeah, I do. And then, I mean, you know, you would imagine it'll be Robertson, Mundle. The midfield 3 picks itself as long as everybody's fit. The other one then is Ballard, isn't it? Where's Ballard at? Is he going to be fit? Is he back? Is he match sharp? Where's he at? And that's, you know, that's the other longer term selection issue that is going to be interesting to see where Labrice ends up there, because, you know, Metham has come in and done really well. 09's obviously there. I mean, it sounds like Alesi is still going to be a fair way off. Again, I expect Labrice to update on that tomorrow. But, you know, it's going to be 2 from 3 for most of the next month, provided Ballard's back fit. And I don't think it's clear cut which way he goes there. You know, I mean, I think if everyone's available, the first choice is probably still 09 and Ballard. But that feels a bit harsh on Neffem, and I don't think it's absolutely nailed on.
The one thing we haven't talked about yet is Niall Huggins' new deal. Just briefly before we wrap up, he obviously Wednesday night signed an extension to 2026 with an option of a further year for the club. His contract was due to expire next summer. Huggins hasn't played a lot of football for Sunderland since he signed from Leeds in 2021. Obviously, his first couple of years, in his words, were horrendous. But then in the first half of last season, we saw just how good he could be, and then came the sickening injury against Coventry at the end of December. And because he hasn't played yet, and because all the indications are that it's going to be early next year when he comes back, well, that obviously raised uncertainty, given that he's then in the final months of his contract. He is a defender who's had a rotten injury record, hasn't played much. And yet, as we've seen, you could have. I mean, you've got an international full-back there whose best years are going to be ahead of him. When the contract was announced yesterday, and reading Huggins' quotes and Speakman's quotes, on a personal level, you've just got to be chuffed for Huggins, I think, to have that bit of security after what he's been through. But I think also from a Sunderland perspective, I know, like, what happens on the pitch will always dictate decisions in football. But it kind of felt like the decent thing to do, to give him an option of it. And I know like that's often too simplistic in football, but I don't know, that was the kind of instinctive reaction when I read the stuff and saw the news.
Yeah, well, I think it's one of those happy ones where there is that human element to it, but it also makes hard-headed business sense for Sunderland as well to get it sorted, time down, and then see how he is when he comes back, and then there's a decision to be made then. I mean, you know, I think a lot of what you were saying there about Niall Huggins also applies to Adji Alesi, doesn't it? And actually, Sunderland have 2 defenders there where if both of them had stayed fit through the whole of their Sunderland careers, there's every chance that both of them are nailed-on starters in the first team. And that we're not having a Ballard discussion, we're not having a Metham discussion, we're not having a Sirkin discussion, we're not having a Hume discussion, blah, blah, blah. You know, because both of them have shown at times that they are more than good enough to be regular starters in this Sunderland team. And you can't just help but wonder, you know, what might have happened if they'd both stayed fit all the way through. Because, you know, like I say, there's every chance that both of them are nailed-on starters, and we're raving about them in the same way that we've raved about Ballard through his time and Hume through his time. And really the only reason we haven't done that with both of them is just because we have not seen anywhere near enough of them.
Well, fingers crossed we see Huggins back in action early next year. And obviously now he has that security of 18 months left on initial deal. And as I say, club have the option of a further year to 2027. Thanks very much, Scott. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks as ever to our partners at the Fans Museum and Cospex Opticians. Do subscribe if you haven't already on the YouTube channel, and get in touch on the comments there if there's anything you want us to discuss. And if you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review as well. If you've listened to us chunter on for more than half an hour and you're still with us on a podcast platform, then I definitely think it's worth getting stuck into the reviews and leaving something there if you can. We'll have full build-up. As I say, Labrissa's press conference is Friday afternoon, so we'll have full build-up ahead of the whole game on Sunday, and then Scott's at the MKM Stadium on Sunday afternoon, so we'll have reaction and analysis from there. Hopefully another Sunderland win, and we'll be back next week to look back on that game and to preview the midweek game. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Take care.